Now that we have a good understanding of critical reviews, let's start categorizing and ranking the papers. You can use the papers I'm using in this video, which I'll cite in the description, but it's best to follow along with your own sources as we go. We'll be using this Paper Categorizer 2.0 chat that I'll link at the bottom as well. It's a custom ChatGPT bot for the lab to use for critical reviews. This is the general format of the bot's output. If you ask it to rank a paper, it will give you a score 1 through 6 for causality, external validity, and robustness and transparency. If you want to dive deeper into the ranking, you can use Control F or Command F, depending on your computer, and search for that quote. This bot specifically has been instructed to be rigid and consistent, meaning it applies the rubric in the same way across all papers. If you uploaded the paper twice, it should receive the exact same scores. It's also supposed to be critical, meaning it shouldn't inflate scores and should default to lower causality scores when identification is weak. So that means if a paper was between a 2 and a 3, for example, it should just be scored as a 2. Weak empirical papers can definitely still be scored. They will just receive weaker scores. Like if a paper is more anecdotal, they would receive a 1 on causality and probably a 1 on robustness and transparency since they won't have any data to analyze. Also, if the paper is a meta-analysis or literature review, bot will just return review instead of scores. For the robustness and transparency score, even if you see numbers and statistics like p-values in a paper, be careful. The chatbot is instructed that a model counts as specified only if the analysis could reasonably be recreated with the data. It's instructed to be rigid, consistent, and critical across all disciplines. So papers from fields like medicine, psychology, economics, history, and things like that will all be scored with the same rubric and held to the same standard. All right, let's try it. Click Add Photos and Files and select the paper you want to rank. You can ask it something specific, but if you just send the prompt, the default is such that it will just give you the correct output. So it says there's a causality of 3 out of 6. The chatbot is instructed to back all of its claims and justifications up with actual quotes from the paper. It classifies this study as an observational classroom comparison without random assignment. It received an external validity score of 4 out of 6, which, going back to our rubric, means that the study should be set in a real classroom and have strong learning outcomes, but it wasn't replicated across courses, instructors, institutions, or departments. Now, this says students in both sections, meaning that this experiment actually was run in more than one classroom. It gives us a caveat here that the study was conducted in only one course at an institution, so the instructor and discipline didn't change, which is why it remains out of 4. If this was not specified, go to the original paper and read it yourself. Looking for evidence to support a causality rank, you'll most likely find it under method or methodology, participants, procedure, or sometimes even the end of an introduction. Once you've verified the information, you can return to the bot and continue. For robustness and transparency, it says that the paper clearly specifies models and reports inferential statistics, along with coefficients, significance tests, confidence intervals, and things like that. It said there's very limited robustness checking, but they do discuss limitations. Going to the actual paper, I'm not seeing an equation anywhere in here, which means that I'll want to double check the model, just asking if we could basically rerun the experiment if we have the data with how upfront they were about their model. While they didn't specify it in mathematical notation, they did describe it clearly with words, so we actually could reconstruct the equation. This is important to note. Even if you don't see any called out equations in the text, that doesn't mean that they haven't correctly specified their model. Want to know more about their assumptions? So I'll ask, what assumptions were discussed, if any? There is no formal testing for normality of residuals, homoscedasticity, or multicollinearity, which are the basic assumptions for a formal regression. However, they do aim to identify confounding variables and other things that might have affected their results. So according to our rubric, this paper would be out of 3. They state the model and they give the basic inference, but there's no way to know if their model was appropriate for the data that they had. Originally, it was scored with a 4 for robustness and transparency, so I'm going to contest that. You always need to be the one to make the final decision about the rankings. The bot will often give too much or too little leeway, especially in the robustness and transparency aspect, and so suggesting a different rating is never a bad idea if you think it might fit better. Sometimes the bot will agree with you, and sometimes it won't. Like if I tried to push that this deserves a 2 in causality, it explains why its original ranking is still better. So at the end, you receive a row that you can copy and paste into a spreadsheet. So I've done that here. You have the bib key, the publication year, and the author, and then you list causality, external validity, and robustness. If you want, you can have a column over here to record any extra notes, but these 3 columns should be enough for the critical review. You'll see in this line right here that this paper was categorized as a review. So let's take a look at what the chatbot does when you upload a paper that cannot be classified as an empirical paper. So it just tells you straight up, this is a review. It's synthesizing prior research, which a lot of empirical papers might do, especially in a literature review at the beginning of the paper, but then they'll follow it up with their own experiment. This article is simply a synthesis. So it just gives you this row, just says classify it as a review. And so you just list it in the spreadsheet as a review. In addition to double checking rankings, you can ask other more pointed questions about each of the categories. Let's look at this paper by Agrawal from 2019. It ranks causality at a 6 because this is a randomized control trial, which it supports with quotes from the paper. It classifies external validity as 5, but offers an explanation of why it was not a 6. And it also ranked as a 5 on robustness and transparency. The only reason it wasn't a 6 was because there was no posted code or data. And this will be the case for almost every paper. Unless their data or code is publicly available, it will rank as a 5 for robustness and transparency, which means the experiment was conducted with high statistical rigor and that the authors acknowledged any limitations. Something important to note here is that it looks like this particular paper talks about more than one experiment. Like it says, experiment 3 was just with 6th grade students, while a different experiment included college students. So while this might increase external validity, you also have to be careful with papers including multiple experiments to make sure that it's not overclaiming anything. This paper is really long, and I'm having trouble finding the model, so I'll ask, where is the statistical model? And it confirms that even though it might not be as clearly specified as it could be, it's still enough to reproduce the analyses from the data, if we had it. To ask specifically about assumptions and robustness checks, because you'll find that this is one of the most common things that papers leave out. It says that it doesn't really have any formal discussions of the assumptions, and after performing a quick sanity check in the paper, that's true. So it says it's definitely more than a 3, because they fully specify the model and inference, and it suggests to still keep it at a 5, but that a 4 is justifiable. When in doubt, it's best to choose the lower number, but you can have a coworker look at it, or you can throw the source into NotebookLM. You can always use NotebookLM to double-check ratings or other information, but when in doubt, read the paper yourself. If you still need help understanding the paper, Notebook is a really useful tool. As of right now, I feel like it's a little better at giving you the specifics because it includes direct citations, so you don't have to copy and paste and do the Control F thing. But ChatGPT gives much more accurate ratings according to our rubrics. So even if you paste the rubric into NotebookLM and ask it to rank the paper, it's often a little too generous with its ratings, so scoring should primarily be done by ChatGPT and by you, but it never hurts to have an extra set of eyes, or in this case, an extra set of AIs. The last thing I wanted to mention is that you can also ask this bot questions about the experiment in general. If you're having trouble understanding the paper, you can use this list to get you started. It's good to understand what exactly is being studied, the unit of analysis, the main outcome variable, what they're measuring, the main independent variable or treatment, comparison they're making. This would be a good question to ask NotebookLM. How does this agree or disagree with current literature? If you've uploaded all the sources that you've found to that notebook, this would be a great one to ask. And these are some other questions to help you better understand rankings for categories. This one under external validity, what are the outcome measures and are they meaningful, is especially helpful when you're ranking external validity between 3 and 4. A category 3 study, a real setting with weak outcome measures, might be hard to tell from a category 4. But as you use the chatbot, you should be able to get a feel for what is a strong or weak outcome measure, including if it's short-term or long-term. Continue iterating, reading, prompting, and checking until you feel like you could defend the rankings that the paper's been given. Then, copy and paste the row into your spreadsheet to keep track of all your sources. In the next few videos, we'll start crafting the actual critical review.